Hello, and welcome back to the show! Before we get started, make sure you like, share, and leave a comment at the end of the video. And if you like the show and want more, make sure you check out our Patreon, where you can access content like behind-the-scenes vlogs, previews for up-and-coming projects, gaming sessions, and exclusive bonus episodes. Also, make sure you check out our Etsy shop for merch. We have plenty of shirts, mugs, and even stickers. And lastly, if you want to follow us elsewhere, look for @RyanPotsFunny on all other platforms. Now on with the show. Hello, and welcome back to It's a Spectrum, the podcast where we explore the personal perspectives of people with neurodivergency. Today, we have kind of a recurring, you were on, the previous podcast.
Yeah, I was on the,
guest and friend, Carissa Gomez. Hello.
Thank you, Ryan.
I'm glad. So, little, embarrassing tidbit about me. I always get people's names wrong.
Oh, you didn't get my name incorrect. Sorry. Well, you got it correct. Yeah, this time you got it. Yeah.
I'm terrible with names. Literally, I was talking to Josh and I was going to send him a video, and in the middle of sending him the video, I forgot how to spell his name. So I was like super worried because I was like, it's one of those things where like, you know.
Walk in, is it like when you walk into a room and then you forget what you're doing? Is it like that kind of thing?
It's more like when you know that you might get something wrong, so you keep telling yourself, don't do this thing. And then that's all you think about, and then your brain wants to. Because for some reason, when I talk to you, I know Carissa, but every time I'm typing your name, I keep thinking Clarissa. Fucking.
Well, I get that a lot. I get Clarissa explains it all, and then I really don't want to explain anything afterwards. I'm done with that. I've had that all my life. Actually, as a matter of fact, when I was a kid, I remember, because I didn't grow up with like Nickelodeon or any of that, but when I started like going to school with like white kids, they'd be like, "Oh, you're like Clarissa Explains It All," and I was like, "What?" I was like, "What is that? Is that like And I didn't know it was a show, and it angered me to the point where I stopped using my first name and started using my middle name more, because I hated that. I hated people saying that.
Can I ask what your middle name is?
Oh, it's Ashley.
Ashley.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah. Yeah, my family calls me Ashley.
I tried to go by my middle name once because, so my older brother goes by his middle name with our family.
Oh, okay.
Because it's a thing of like, it's a common Latino thing. The oldest son is named after the dad, but because they have the same first name, he goes by his middle name so people don't get confused.
Yeah, so they don't call him like so-and-so the first or second, third. Yeah.
And for some reason, I thought that would just change my whole high school situation. So I tried going by Daniel. I even created like a persona. I wasn't acting as the persona, but like this was at a time when I was getting into art and trying to learn music. So I created this version of like, if I had a stage name, this would be my name, which I'm not going to share because it's embarrassing. But my first name would have been Daniel, and it didn't work.
Can you give me an example of what Daniel would do?
Just like, Daniel is into impressionist art. He's into, jazz.
Does he wear a beret and like wear all black?
He's real into Miles Davis, we'll say that. Which was like, it didn't help that my guidance counselor was super into Miles Davis, so it's all we talked about.
So did he like grip his forehead and like think pensively and into thought? Kind of the way I'm dressed right now. I look like I'm doing slam poetry, like
snaps instead of claps. Yeah.
Like when Spider-Man went dark. That's what it reminds me of.
That's so funny. I always love that version of Peter Parker going bad, because it's like the concept, the way that I heard, I don't know if this is factual, but supposedly the reason Sam Raimi did it that way is like, he's not evil. He's what a nerd thinks the evil version of himself looks like.
Yeah. That's exactly
like he's Peter Parker's version of a bad boy, and I thought that was a funny. Take
like
on the
like
character.
he's not evil, but he's like supposed to bad meaning as in he's sexy.
Yeah.
Like that. We're like, oh, he's cool and he's confident. He's not mean like this kind of like Montgomery Burns mean, you know, like
Yeah, and I think like with that purview of the character, it's so funny to see like, oh, he thinks this is cool.
Yeah, but
yeah.
it's so bad. It ends up it feels like it's like when you see fuckboys, like guys try to be so slick, you know, and you're like, oh, this is so bad, it's so cringy. It's like, yeah, that's exactly what that is. Or like girls when they try to be so cute,
Right.
and they like you know, and I'm like, oh.
They do the voice and everything.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So I guess you got a taste of what neurodivergence is.
Well, actually, so I got distracted. Normally, we start off with a general question of whatever you're comfortable sharing, but can you tell us a little bit about your experience, your journey with being diagnosed?
Oh, okay. So when I would say probably about, I started noticing symptoms when I was a teenager.
Right.
And I don't know if, let's say it had to do with, because I've had a lot of head injuries as a child, maybe if it's like residual from that, you know what I mean? But like, I mean, I guess most people would think like if you had head injuries, you wouldn't, like a mental illness is not the result. Like they would think it would be the opposite where you just end up like low IQ. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, they're like, mental illness? No. Low IQ? Probably. That's, you know, like, they're not thinking that I'm solving Rubik's Cubes. They're thinking that, like, I'm going to be drooling inside somewhere, you know, like that. Right. That's where I think, you know, most people went. But I've had a few bad head injuries. I guess maybe, like, the one that I remember, and that's funny to say that I remember my head injury. Like, I remember my head injury. It was funny too because, and I've been trying to write this into a joke for the longest time, but it's just too straightforward. But like when I was a kid and I was in kindergarten, and I went to Euclid Elementary School, which was like right off the freeway, like in LA, it's by Boyle Heights. I went to that elementary school, and back then they had, you know, the jungle gyms, and they weren't the dome ones, but right. They were square. So they were built like a cube. And I climbed all the way up to the top, and like that square, that cube had like 3 levels to it. And I remember when I climbed to the top, I was so excited. I was like screaming like, hey, look at me. Look what I could do. And as soon as I lifted my hand to like wave, oh yeah, I slipped, fell, and hit my head on every pole coming down. So it was like, dun, 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 dun. It sounded like a xylophone. It was like, ding, 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 ding. And then that's what I remember as a kid. And then afterwards, they took me to the office because they were like, "Is she all right?" Because once I landed, we didn't, you know, that playground wasn't like playgrounds like now. Like they had asphalt on the bottom, so I landed on asphalt to add insult to injury, and no pun intended. And then they saw me, and then they thought, oh, she's fine, you know, like she's responsive, she knows her name, kind of deal, you know. And then they called my mom, and my mom was like, so do I have to go pick her up? and they were like, no, not really. She's, you know, if you don't want to, we could keep her for the rest of the day. And I went through the rest of the day with that head injury, and then they took me to the hospital, and then they told me, hey, yeah, she has a concussion. Yeah. Damn. And that's the first time I learned what that was, you know. I thought it was just something like football players got. Oh, I didn't think you could get it from like falling and hitting your head in a jungle gym, but anyway, so getting back to the diagnosis thing, I think I was just a clumsy kid, and I fell, I hit my head a lot, and so when I was a teenager, I I guess I ended up noticing like behavioral changes in myself. Like I wasn't feeling good anymore.
Right.
Like I was, I don't know. It's like a slow, it was like a slow, I don't know, like the slow transition. And then, as soon as like when I graduate, like when I was in high school, I noticed that I was like really depressed, and then I was having like thoughts of suicide, like really intense thoughts. And I was like, I told my mom, I said, Mom, I think I should go, seek a therapist for this kind of stuff. And then, cause she's Mexican. She like freaked out. She's like, why? I was right. Like she didn't want me to go get help. She thought that she had this antiquated idea of, what, behavioral hospitals were. She thought they were like mental asylums. Like they were going to lock me in there forever. They were going to give me a prefrontal lobotomy. That she thought I was going to become like Frankenstein or something. And, it wasn't until I turned 18 that I went to go get help. And then they put me on antidepressants. And it was while I was getting help, I feel like it progressed faster between the ages of 18 and 20. So my symptoms started just rapidly showing up. And I think it probably had to do with stress. Because I was going to school. I was working full time and I was going to school full time. And like that doesn't play a healthy role in, like managing your time. And then on top of it, I had like an abusive boyfriend. And yeah, it was just a disastrous situation. And so, I was paranoid. I wanted to kill myself. I hated who I was. Nobody knew what was going on. I didn't know how to process my feelings because I wasn't taught how to do that as a child. It was just like an amalgamation of things, boom, 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 that just put me into my first hospitalization. And I was 19 when that happened. And from then, that's when they gave me like, they had all kinds of tests that they gave me. They like made me fill out forms and, bubble tests, and they kept me in the hospital for like 2 weeks. And then they put me on antipsychotics, and they try, like, because what they try to do is they try to find which antipsychotics and antidepressants like work to help mitigate the symptoms. It's almost like they're in an experimental phase of what's going on. They're like, we don't, it's almost like you tell them your symptoms, but they're like, well, we still don't know what's going on. We're just going to experiment to see what's going to work, And the thing is that the drugs work up until a certain point.
Right.
And then up until that certain point, like, let's say if they feel like if it gets worse or, it goes down or whatever, I feel like they just kept taking me off drugs and putting me on different ones, taking me off. And then that was making me even more insane because I felt even more unstable, because then I had to deal with the side effects from that. And then, the mood swings that came with dealing with all of that, and the irritability, and then, people expecting you to function a certain way. That's the worst part, is people expecting you to be normal through all of this when you're like, you're freaking out. You're like, I don't know what's going on. Like, I don't have any control of it. You know what I mean? So I don't know if it's due in part, like it's hormonal, or if it's just everything. I just remember during that time, my brain feeling like it was in a cyclone of just a mess.
Right.
I just remember that, just feeling just, and that lasted, I actually got like a few degrees, surprisingly, through that mess. but I felt like my health was getting worse because I was using alcohol to cope, on top of, being on the antipsychotics and antidepressants. And then I remember just always feeling this constant dread of like, you're not going to make it. You know what I mean? I was like, if you don't kill yourself tomorrow, you'll kill yourself the day afterwards. And that's how I thought every single day. I was just like, you're one mistake away from killing yourself. I remember that it was a constant, like, you're going to kill yourself. You're going to kill yourself. I remember that because I didn't want to be in this body. I didn't want to be in this head. I didn't want to have this identity.
Right.
And I just remember hating it. I just hated. I hated life. I hated, because part of it was struggling to find doctors and to find, relief. That was the biggest thing. It was like, well, how do I find relief from all of this? And it was even worse because everyone was expecting me to do it on my own.
Right.
You can't do this on your own. You have to have support. That doesn't, because I think what fucked people up was they saw me as a capable human being at some point in my life. And then they see you crumble, as an adult. They're like, what's going on?
Yeah, it seems to be, I can only speak from an outward perspective in this regard, but being someone of neurodivergence in general, I do kind of see that concept of like people who don't have to deal with these things want to separate, that concept from their daily existence in order to just be comfortable. Yeah. And I can understand where that comes from, but the downside of it is, like in general, diagnosis is difficult, especially later, when we're all adults already, especially like with something like this, which I don't know if we've said already.
Oh yeah, I have schizophrenia. Right. So yeah, at first they thought it was like schizoaffective disorder, but I don't have like bipolar mania. Like I don't teeter from those extremes. It was more of just the symptoms of like, hearing hallucinations, audio visual, like the visions of grandeur sometimes, and that took them a while because when they were giving me medication for schizoaffective disorder, that's what made me want to kill myself even more because it wasn't working. They were like, well, she's got a mood disorder, but it's like, no, I don't have a mood disorder.
Right, it's kind of just like you reacting to...
Right, exactly. I'm reacting
what you do have.
To my stressors. That's not a mood disorder. I'm just reacting to people, like treating me like trash. Like that's not a mood disorder. But it was causing, like that stress was causing those symptoms. And it was later on, once I got older and I had more of... let's say, more autonomy, more control over like my treatment and my care, that I started looking for different doctors, and this was unfortunately after the fact, like after I got off of my parents' insurance, because this was during that time when they put that age limit where like, oh, you can't be on your parents' insurance anymore after I graduated from school, and I made a decision like you can't keep wanting to kill yourself because you keep ending up in the hospital and it gets worse. Right. Like you're not doing yourself any good repeating that cycle. Like it's not working, And so I was like, you got to actually work through this. You got to find someone that helps you. And oddly enough, it was through government insurance that they paired me with the right doctor.
Yeah, that's something that I've been experiencing recently. And for me, like where that does correlate is like the idea of, one, ADHD is such a specific concept to people that when it doesn't look the way they think it looks, right, they're unintentionally sometimes, but almost always immediately dismissive. Right. Yes. And it's frustrating because the reality of having ADHD is it does have a direct debilitating impact on my day-to-day existence. You know, it causes specific mechanics in the brain that halt my ability to make decisions or remember decisions or take action in times of stress. And so bringing it back to what I was saying,
like executive function.
Executive function, everything, and bringing it back to like how I'm relating it to what you're saying is like trying to get treated for that has been extremely difficult. And I'm someone who happens to be fortunate enough to have a coexisting diagnosis.
Yeah.
Where like I didn't have to fight for it when I was assessed and saw a specialist. I got a confirmed diagnosis of autism and ADHD and OCD. But trying as an adult, even with a confirmed diagnosis of all three, trying to get treated for that has been exhausting because, you move from doctor to doctor and some of them are willing to hear you out and some of them aren't. I remember literally a year ago, I switched psychologists specifically for this reason. I had a psychologist who, when she heard me say ADHD after seeing autism on my chart, was trying to convince me. She was immediately like, well, a lot of people come in for that, especially a lot of, younger millennials and early Gen Z. They see on TikTok all these people having ADHD and they relate to it heavily. And so they think they have it. And I stopped her and was like, okay, I understand what you're saying. I didn't go on TikTok for this.
Right.
It's on my paper. If you literally turn the page, it'll tell you that I also have ADHD and OCD.
Right. So it's a pre-existing comorbidity.
Yeah. And it's like even when you actively have it and it's on paper, as long as it doesn't look the way they expect it to,
right,
they're always going to be hesitant to acknowledge it. To the point where like I have learned to allow myself to demask.
That's the tough part too.
Yeah.
It's not like you're not pretending that you're okay, but it's almost like you're letting your guard down. And it's a weird thing to say, you know what I mean? Like, because like demask, when I think of mask, I always think of like, people that have the narcissistic personality disorder.
Right.
I always think of mask as in they're masking their right. illness, but it's the same concept, but we're not doing it in, we're not doing it in a way where we're trying to take advantage of someone else. We're doing it to protect ourselves because we're afraid.
It's defense, not offense.
Right. It's a defense. Yeah, exactly. So like demasking, that's something that I've also had trouble with because I've had people who have said, "Oh no, you're faking it. I call bullshit on," and I'm like, but you also have never known me prior to this time.
Right.
Like, how do you know what I've gone through? You don't know all the many times that I've gone to see that I've attempted to kill myself. You don't know all those times, where they've resuscitated me, where they've tried to bring me back, from like a drug overdose. You don't know those things that I went through. You were not there with my family to experience that. You can't tell me that I'm faking this.
Right. Yeah, I definitely experienced that a lot, especially that I started doing comedy.
Yeah.
I've talked about it. Sorry.
No, because they see like, oh, you can function to some extent. You must be faking the other stuff. And it's like,
right.
No, I mean, if you come home with me, then you'll find out, you'll see where the symptoms are, for my family, though, they see that as that's my baseline. That's my normal me. But if you hang out with me long enough, you'll start seeing like little things that I do, Yeah,
that's always the thing with people, especially like that I do this and I do stand up.
Yeah.
It's something that people can't comprehend. There's like phases where people see it and they don't, what I mean? Like I have, some there's a lot of people who follow me and watch my content and they associate me with this like persona that they've created for me because of the way I sound and the way I articulate myself.
Yeah.
I have a soft, high pitched seeming voice. And then there's people who hear the eloquence and the dictation in my words and they go the other route where they, so the first people were infantilizing me, and then these people will disregard anything I have to say because I'm capable of saying it.
Right.
And it's been an interesting thing. It's an interesting concept from, my perspective, from this side of the mask.
Yeah.
Because as fluid and relaxed as this seems, it is at its very core manufactured. You know, I have learned how to apply inflection because it's a thing that I've wanted. You know, I study voice acting, study impressions, I study comedy.
Yeah. No, that's a good point that you bring. It's almost like it's. And I've said this to my sister too before. It's almost like when you learn social skills, you're like, have you seen like where the way they depict like space aliens?
Right.
Like it's almost like we're space aliens, but in this body, and we're like, I'm learning to be human today. You know?
Yeah.
It feels like that every day. We're like, now I gotta go, and now I gotta wake up, and I gotta assume this human body.
Yeah.
You know. That's exactly, you know, because if we were just ourselves, you know, and I think if we were just ourselves and we didn't have to feel the consequence of like having to be forced to live in, you know, society and the parameters of like society,
right.
like, oh, that person is acting really weird, you know, and we would bring suspicion onto ourselves just for being normal.
My head hurts.
There's a tea for that.
I'm also sick.
There's a tea for that.
And I can't sleep.
Aw. Well, there's a tea for that.
Where are you finding all these teas?
Legacy Teas and Spices, of course.
What if I just want black tea?
They have that.
What if I get tired of regular tea?
Well, you're in luck. Legacy has a wide array of blended teas and flavors, including favorites like Peach Lavender Rose, Passion Fruit Hibiscus, and the all-time bestseller, Vanilla Lemongrass. Here, see for yourself.
Wow, I can't wait to try it.
Make sure to go to legacyteasandspices.com and use coupon code RYAN20 for 20% off.
One of the things that, like, one of my comorbidities is like, I don't want it to sound cliche, but it's like obsessive. It's not obsessive compulsive, but it's like an obsessive need to be clean. And this is like, I put lotion on my hands earlier because I constantly wash my hands. I'm constantly washing my hands. And I think a lot of my anxiety, like social anxieties, being around people, come from my fear of getting exposed, to getting sick, to that kind of level of like, I don't want to do this, you know, like for me, it took a while to like tell my doctor these things, because I used to wash my hands to the point to where they would blister.
Right.
Like I had like the first layer of my skin wasn't there anymore. Like I would wash them to the point like my knuckles were blistered open. Like, you know, like it was exposed, like it was bleeding, like that, right. Like that kind of, it was like scary to see. It was like, you know, and it scared me because I was like, I don't know how to stop it. You know, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. This washing my hands brought me comfort, because then I knew, okay, so because this was the only thing that I did to interact. You know, like this is the only way that I interacted with the world was through touching it. And I was like, I don't want to be a part of it. So I would wash my hands compulsively and freak out when I would touch stuff. And
right.
Because I was like, oh, now I'm bringing it with me. No, I don't want to, I don't want to do that. I still have a lot of those characteristics. I carry baby wipes. I carry hand sanitizers. I like alcohol. I have 3 different types of wipes in my car. Like that's stuff that if you hang out with me long enough, you'll start seeing that. And over the time, I've learned to not freak out when, I still get angry when people drop stuff in my car, because I'm like, that's no. But yeah. Over time, it's taken me a while to get used to. It's almost like I'm getting used to existing with other things, and it's beyond my control kind of thing,
Right.
like letting go is basically the
Yeah, I mean, I think I can understand that. I personally, as I mentioned before, also was diagnosed with OCD, and that was it was a weird distinction to learn through having OCD, because people heavily associate it with that
like
same
tics.
compulsion of cleanliness and repetitiveness, and those are specific, stereotypical, and extreme examples. And it's not to say that OCD is not extreme. It is extreme. You know what I mean? There's a lot of public figures that have it that you can see in how they interact. But people, like I said before, create that same association every single time, so they only associate with that.
Right.
And
it's
they
not
don't
just
see
that, yeah.
Yeah, they don't see how it... For me, how I understand it, OCD is a brain's individual accumulative response to not only trauma, but to extreme stressors.
Right.
Like it's an attempt for the brain to seek control in a situation where you might not have control. Yeah.
Yeah. Through
what's one thing that's specific? I have this thing where my brain starts to wander. So when I'm walking, and because of that, I used to get lost a lot. So I started doing this thing where I would count my steps, and it was like the attempt behind it was to give my brain something to focus on, so that my brain was like paying attention to what I was doing.
Yeah.
And it was a thing of like, I'd count my steps from my house to the bus stop, from the, once I got off the bus, from the bus for to my first class and stuff. And it developed into this thing where I was always counting while I was walking. And it wasn't like sometimes I was counting the amount of steps. Sometimes I was making sure that I was walking in a pace of 4s. I had this weird obsession with even numbers. And
I don't know. I think it's funny because I understand that. I feel
yeah. And so it was a thing. I'm trying to remember the original point I was trying to make, where it wasn't specifically what I learned was the misconception with OCD is not the manifestations. OCD is what leads to the manifestations. OCD is the idea of learning to cope through the tics. So like OCD doesn't give you an obsession with numbers.
No.
OCD is you're constantly concerned about the world around you and the worst things that could happen. So to give yourself a sense of control, you start practicing patterns and numbers.
Yeah.
And those are the side effects of the disorder, not the actual technical manifestation.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's what some people don't understand when it comes to diagnoses is that you aren't the symptom. You know, the symptom is what's showing up. Right. That's how your brain is making those things show up. You know what I mean? And then that's how they figure out. They're like, oh, okay, so this is what you're doing. So this is what we're going to call it in particular.
Right.
But the thing that bothers me the most is because I've gotten therapy, and you know what I mean? And we're on the subject of how it doesn't look like we're affected. You know what I mean? To some extent, because we're functional. It doesn't look like we're affected by these things, but that's because we're getting therapy.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I think that's why I was leading to.
Yeah.
But I got distracted by what I was saying.
You got distracted in the details. You were counting the details.
That's how I was relating it to what you were saying earlier was... I've had so much practice with my OCD that it still occurs. The thoughts that caused the panic, that caused the tics, still occur. I have just gotten better at managing them so that I don't react outwardly as much.
Right. Yeah. So you learn how to recognize. You're like, oh, if is this what's happening? Am I stressed? And you start learning how. You start seeing your symptoms before they start getting worse and unraveling before like they used to. So you're like, okay, what am I not addressing inside that's making these things show up?
Yeah.
You know, because I'll notice like certain days I'll wake up and I'm just not having it. You know, I'm just like, you know what? And I recognize when I'm not having it, because one of the things that I do, one of my habits is I work out to help manage the symptoms, because I feel like, you know, because I get anxiety, and I feel like the anxiety kind of revs up the process. Like if I have too much pent up anxiety, then it starts showing up again, and it causes the stress. And then I'm like, you know, so it helps me get out the stress, like whatever is. But if I start noticing while I'm at the gym, I'll start noticing whether I want to be around, like how far from people I'm okay with. You know, like if I'm exercising next to somebody like this distance and it's bothering me, I'll start thinking, okay, what did you not do that, you know, what is it about your needs that you're not addressing that's making you feel like this person is being intrusive to you? Because when I'm not feeling comfortable, like if I go to the gym and I see the guy exercising next to me, my first response is this guy can probably hear my thoughts. You know what I mean? And he probably knows what I'm thinking. He probably can, you know, like, and then I just start, my brain will just spiral into more thoughts and like, and then I'm like, I start catching that and I'm like, he doesn't even know what you're saying. You know what I mean? Like this guy is just a completely unassuming person, you know? And for the longest time, like the way I used to deal with people being too close to me, especially at the gym, is I will growl on the machine. Like I'll go, you know, like just to scare them away. So I have like kind of a little more space than usual. And I noticed like that's one of the things too. Like I just get anxious around, and I don't know if it's like a mixture of like I just get anxious, and I start seeing. It's strange because I have not told my doctor this thing in particular, and because this is something that I've noticed just being in public spaces, why I hate being in crowded areas, why I hate even when and then I think this also comes to like intimacy, because I like gave up on dating. It's more of like a crowdedness. Like I start getting paranoid at any sign of my independence being threatened. I start freaking out.
Right.
You know, and that's something I haven't mentioned to my doctor.
No, yeah, that reminds me of like when I used to have to explain my claustrophobia to people, because there's certain circumstances where I like the feeling of compression and the feeling of snugness. What I would explain to people is like, it's not the tight space itself, it's the lack of control I might have in that space. Right. Yeah. Like being bundled up in a blanket, you chose to do that, you're doing that on purpose. Yeah. You know where the seam is to get out of it, versus like being in a crowded elevator. If I'm in the middle, I can't get out. Yeah, there's too many variables. I can't. There's no room for me to breathe, and that's when I start focusing. And that's been like the biggest thing to honestly help me with my anxiety, is just being descriptive and verbal about it, and being like, knowing when I can actively accommodate and knowing like when I can't do a situation and I have to be vocal. Like if I'm going to be put in a tight space where I'm not going to be able to control myself, yeah, I could, shut my eyes and cover my ears and just wait for it to be over. But who's that benefiting? Right. Like like going on old rides with my family and be like, your enjoyment is not dependent on me. Yeah, you enjoy roller coasters. Yeah, I do not. Yeah, you can. They can do that alone. Does nothing for either of us. Right. It just stresses me out, and then I'm in a mood the rest of the day. And I was like, I don't mind watching people's stuff. I don't mind, finding you can do this, and I'll go watch the jazz club, and I'm fine. I love the jazz club. I was talking about Disneyland for reference. And it's a thing of like, I can find stuff that I can do. Like, yeah, it's meant to be a family event, but it's like, I'm also part of the family. You know what I mean? Like, if I'm not enjoying myself, what's the point of me coming? Exactly. Okay. So that's funny that you bring that kind of stuff up, where
I feel like if you're vocal, do you ever feel like sometimes if you're vocal with what you're comfortable with and what you're uncomfortable with some people get upset by that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, I feel like it's often the dynamic of like talking to somebody who's older who like probably feels the same way, but for, they had to do it. And so
right.
And it becomes a thing of like, well, if I have to do it, why can't you just, and it's not always like specifically in the same family. Like sometimes it's also talking to just people who have that experience of like, well, I had to do it. And it's like, to a degree, it's not your fault, but you didn't have to. Right.
Yeah. You just felt obligated to do it because you were pressured and you thought that you didn't have any other options.
And I've even like learned to do, if I'm trying to take care of a task and like I know that someone else around me is feeling a certain way, I do my best not to stifle other people's ability to express themselves or understand their own emotions. But when, I've been in circumstances where someone might be having a bad day and so they're hyper vigilant. I've had managers who are having a bad day and because of that, they're more hyper, people are more aware of themselves and their surroundings when they're upset. That's like a statistic, scientific fact. Like, I think I learned that because like supposedly that's why you remember nightmares more than you remember dreams. But regardless, so when I'm in a circumstance where I'm trying to get something done and somebody else is feeding into that by observing me, I'm vocal about it. It's like, hey, I can recognize if you're going through something right now. And if you want to talk about it, we can talk about it. But the way it's manifesting to me is affecting my ability to complete my stuff.
Yeah.
And so, and in that point, like if I make them aware of that and, nobody owes me anything, it's not their job to make me feel better, but it's also not my job to make them feel better. And so it's like it's either a thing of like, it gives them the space to acknowledge that maybe they need space, or if they're not willing to take that space for themselves, then I know like, unless it's like there's a time or some kind of like, what's the term? Reason to have it completed at that time in that space.
A deadline.
Yeah. That I have to deal with. If I'm given that room, I take the space for myself. And I'm like,
right. Yeah. Because you're taking your accountability as best as you can.
Yeah. Like I can only control what I can control.
Right. Exactly. But I feel that, and this is when I start learning this is what it's important when it comes to like establishing boundaries. I don't know. I think we've touched on that maybe in the past, but that's important, because I keep my boundaries so that I don't spiral, so that I know how to manage my symptoms better.
Yes.
And some people don't understand that part. They think I'm just being a bitch because I have boundaries. And I'm like, well, I mean, if that was the case, I could be a bitch to everybody and about everything, but I'm not. It's only when it comes to like, yeah, today I'm having a rough day. Can you give me that space? And, if that's too much to ask, then I go the next level and I say, well, now I think to myself, I'm going to have less interactions with this particular person because they didn't respect me when I needed that. So it's going to be a repetitive thing where if I feel like if I have to go out of my way to tell somebody that I need this grace, and they think it's more against them, then I will cease to have interactions with people.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want to deal with the trouble of having to do that because I'm already dealing with the trouble of having to take care of myself.
Yeah. And there's sometimes, where, like I was saying before, like nobody owes anybody anything.
Right.
There's a difference between what you owe, what you need, and what you deserve.
Right.
And there's sometimes where that doesn't end positively, but it's like the best possible outcome given the like. There have definitely been times where I've established that specific boundary of like, look, right now I'm not in this space. I need some time to be with myself in this.
Exactly.
And they don't want to. They want to resolve it as soon as possible. And it's and I've been like this has no bearing on you specifically.
Right.
But right now I'm feeling it more emotionally than I am like reasoning with it. And then I want that to subside before we can resolve it officially. And so I just need you to wait a little bit. And then they don't want to. It's like, there's nothing I can do about that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I know that you want it to be over with, but I'm not going to do that just because you wanted to. Because that doesn't make
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like that, especially.
That's putting more stress on you.
Yeah. It's
you know?
also, for me, it's like, especially that I've said that out loud. Deep down, like, you know that I'm still going to be upset about it. You're just going to hope that we move on. It's like, or you just leave me alone for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then we come back and actually resolve it. And then it actually is not only no longer an issue, but we're better for it moving forward. Like,
yeah. Yeah. But, I think that's when it comes to what we're talking about neurodivergency, people who don't experience any form of like, if they're talking about like neurotypical people, they don't understand what that means.
yeah.
You know what I mean? They don't pick up on those things. They don't, it's almost like there's, I don't know, like what I would call like a complete obliviousness to another world that exists in that same parallel. You know what I mean? Like, this is how I'm thinking, but for you to not understand that, even sometimes, even if you explain that to people, it's almost like you have to constantly repeat it to them.
Right.
And then it just doesn't go through. You know, it's like you're not permeating into the, like, they look dense, like there's a certain level of like, yeah, it's not going through to some people. And some people just don't want to understand because they think, well, it's, I'm not affected by it. Why should I care?
Yeah.
Like a very, very dismissiveness, and it's like, okay, well then we won't talk ever if that's how you think.
Yeah. That's been a new thing that I've established, not only as a boundary for myself, but also like as advice that I offer when requested. Like, I don't just spout out,
Right.
mansplain myself to everyone all the time. I don't know if I use that word right because I don't do it. No, I'm just kidding. No, but it's a boundary that I definitely like try to explain to people, not only for them to understand me, but for them to utilize themselves of like,
I burped into the microphone.
no, it's fine.
Is that gonna show up? Sorry, but yeah, you were saying
not only for understanding me better, but also to utilize themselves of like, if you're doing what you need to establish a boundary and do what you need to for yourself, and they're still not reciprocating, then there is the resolvement does not look like you both finding peace with each other and being happy. Resolvement is, that you make that space, that you,
right. Yeah.
It's a thing of like, just because you don't want to agree with something doesn't mean that it's going to change itself for you. Like, it's a phrasing I hear a lot on the internet when people talk about this concept of like, I'm not punishing you, but this is the consequence of
right.
Like,
yes.
If you can't meet me where we're talking about, if the way you interact with me affects me negatively, and I am establishing that as a boundary so that we can move together, move forward, then we can't move forward together. And that's the consequence of
right.
it,
Exactly. I mean? Yeah. Sometimes the consequence is cutting people out of your life.
Yeah, it's like if you created a campfire and you created it right next to me, and I'm like, hey, that was hot. Did you have to make it there? And you don't want to move it, then I'm going to step away from that campfire.
Right, exactly.
I'm not going to sit near the fire that's burning me.
Right. That's just it. I mean, it's weird saying it's a consequence, but it's cause and effect. You know what I mean? Like that you caused that, and this is going to be the effect because and some people are going to get upset because they're like, well, that's not the result that I wanted, but it's the result that happened regardless. And it's, well, you got to deal with it.
It's like if I jump in the air, I'd like to fly. But what'll probably happen is I'm going to throw out my knee.
Right. Or you're going to fall somewhere else. But yeah, I mean, these are all things that you experience with, getting a diagnosis, with having a different way of thinking, with anything that goes against social normal We're
Yeah.
talking normal social parameters.
That's just like light bulb in my head. Like I do think it's funny that the people that are always the most resistant to that concept are the same people that are like, well, life isn't fair, buddy.
Yeah.
And it's like, exactly, life isn't fair.
Yeah,
You don't
life
get
isn't
to-
fair. Yes, you don't get to dictate the rules to
Exactly.
us. It's not going to be fair to you either. So why does it have to be easy for you and not for us?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I understand that. We realize that life isn't fair. We understand that life isn't fair. We're just trying to find a way to soften the blow of it.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
where we're just like, yeah,
Like
but
life is hard enough on its own.
exactly.
It doesn't
Like,
need your
why do
help.
we need it to be worse?
Exactly.
You know, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's, you know, I mean, we were talking about politics before we even started recording, you know, but they want to make cuts and accessibility non-existent
Yeah.
anymore for people like us. You know, I'm not saying that we need the world. We don't need much. It's just more of like they don't want it to be in awareness. And I
Yeah.
think that is the most dangerous precedent, you know, because it's not like they're trying to eliminate us, but that is the first step to wanting to say, yeah, we need to get this out of the human race. And it should be dangerous for all of us. You know what I mean? Because everybody is affected.
Yeah.
You know? Everyone is affected by when I think of you standing up for wanting to have equity, that applies to everybody, because at some point everybody is going to have to deal with something where they're going to be put in a situation for their health where they're going to have to need assistance. They're going to have to need help outside of themselves.
Yeah.
And if we don't talk about, you know, having equity and inclusion, especially in the medical field, nobody is like that. There shouldn't be. Why do we even have a medical field if it's not but for equity and inclusion and for helping people? You know
It's
what I mean?
also like it's been proven, like statistically, historically, whatever, that like when we do engage in these things, when we actually look into the well-being of people, of all people included, it does benefit society as a whole. You know what I mean? Like doing stuff like this, even if you take away the concept of
diversity, yeah.
of diversity and of disability, it's still a thing that when you look into it, it always benefits. You know what I mean? Like, you know, 200 years ago or 100 years ago, I'm bad at history. I got to see.
Like
I'm
medically,
talking about like the workforce.
okay. Oh, the Industrial Revolution.
The
Then,
Industrial Revolution.
So that's about 200 years ago.
You know what I mean? Like it came from a selfish place, and even then, you know, the story goes that what's his name, Harrison Ford, the guy
Henry Ford,
the original Henry Ford,
Yes.
was like, well, if everyone's working at the factory all day, who's buying my car? So
Right,
he
exactly.
gave them weekends, and he gave them time off, and he gave them like regulated days, and people benefited from that. And then the workforce got a lot more like normalized and centralized into like cubicles and things like that. And the office workforce became a thing. And even now there's studies that like not all work requires, you know, 24-hour care, you know.
Right. Well, I mean, that just sounds like torture, first of all. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like life shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
Like why are we don't live to work and then die? That's insane.
Yeah. Another guest we've had on, Danny, pointed this out, and I think she pointed it out in her old Upakido episode, where they were like, to a certain point, at a certain level, like human brains, divergent or otherwise, complex or otherwise, just aren't wired that way.
No.
They crave, like, even in the concept of living for the weekend, it's because your brain is craving that space.
Yeah. I mean, even computers have to be turned off to some point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even computers go to sleep. You know, you can't just have, even cars, you have to turn them off. They can't just keep constantly running. You will burn it out.
Exactly.
You will burn it. I mean, if we're getting on the point of what burnout is, that's just gravity. That's just gravity saying you got to work, like it's working through us essentially, because you're going to get old, you're going to wear parts out, then eventually you'll die. But, we shouldn't have to just live just for that. No, I don't think that. I think talking about, disabilities, talking about neurodivergencies, allowing people to have these spaces to, say in particular to unmask, it helps everyone, and I'm not saying that you have to identify with these types of things, but bringing awareness to these types of things, right? Bringing awareness allows people to say, oh, okay, so it's not me. You know what I mean? And there is no sense of normalcy. There's no, you know what I mean? I think what a lot of people confuse for what normal is there is a baseline you with what you're comfortable with. Yeah. I think we need to, reassess the word normal and call it comfort, because there's, and then I don't know. We'll see where that goes. I don't think people are going to be comfortable with that. But anyway, yeah. Yeah. So.
Well, thank you for being on. It's been a very exciting conversation, I'll say. I had fun.
I mean, I could keep going, but I know you guys have a time limit.
Maybe we'll do a part 2 someday.
Yeah.
We're trying to make more of these. But from us at whatever the podcast this was, it's a spectrum.
It's a spectrum.
Just be aware, Google things, and don't just read the AI overview fucking synopsis of it.
Yeah, get into it.
Look into articles.
Yeah.
The DOR has a website. The Department of Neuroscience has a website. Every charity you've ever thought of has a YouTube channel.
Well, I mean, I don't know. They're going to start taking those things down.
They might. True. They
might take down a lot of those informative.
Do it while you can. Take advantage.
But go buy books. That's where you learn the most. Yeah. Buy the books. Get the DSMs. And you know what? Just actually go see a therapist. Go see a real person who's studied this. Don't get diagnosed by those TikTok doctors.
Exactly. But you should follow us in TikTok.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
if there's anything else to follow, we'll put it in the description. You have your own podcast.
Yeah, I do.
I don't think we got to talk about, but it's a great podcast. Check it out. We'll definitely talk about it in the future.
Yeah. It's called It's Gonna Be Okay. Yeah. Because we don't really know when it's going to be okay.
True.
That's
for now. We're okay with today. Bye-bye.
Thank you. It's a spectrum.
Sure is.